Hey, Nicole Roberts-Jones here, and welcome to another episode of the MeaningFULL Work Podcast, a time that I connect with you to give you insight. And really today is sharing a behind the curtain conversation. So listen, if you are someone that leads teams, you are the leader or you're on a team, which is probably all of us, right? This conversation is for you. Now, before I start going in, let me first say hello. As my grandmother would say, don't walk in this house and not speak. And even though you're watching the recording, I still want you to say hello to me. You know, we're going to pour into you. At least you can do is say, hey. So tell us where you are in the world. If what we share resonates with you, if you have questions, if it steps on your toes, we want to hear it. So please make sure you write in the comments and share with us. That's number one. Number two, I'm going to ask you to share. Now, our guest this week is getting ready to go in on her expertise, and I know this is a conversation that isn't often had in our workplace. So I want you to share it so that other people will feel like, hey, it's not just me that's going through this. So we're in a climate right now where transformation is happening all around us. You know, we hear DEI initiatives coming and going and shifting and moving. And so as I began to write up the notes to this episode, it made me think of this Bible verse, which, by the way, I also read in our first episode, but I think it's apropos for me to read it here. It's 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. Again, 1 Corinthians 12 through 27, that says, for as a body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body. So also is Christ. For in the fact the body is not one member, but many. That's a whole mouthful, y'all, but this is the part I want you to hear. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I'm not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I am not of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where would be the smelling? But now God has set the members, each one of them in the body, just as he pleased. And it goes on and on. And your corporation is a body, y'all. Your organization where you work is a body, and each of you are members of that body. And it's the differences that make the difference. Lastly, I'm going to share, and then we're going to bring up our guest. According to research from McKinsey and Company, considered more diverse and inclusive are 35% companies that are more diverse and inclusive are 35% more likely to outperform their competitors. Additionally, diverse teams are reported to be 87% better at making decisions compared to non-diverse teams, highlighting the significant benefits of embracing differences in the workplace. And so this expert, the guest, is getting ready to break it down for you. And her name is Dr. Nicole Yeldell Butts. Now, Dr. Nicole is a transformational coach, speaker, and organizational cultural strategist with over 25 years of experience driving meaningful change. As a creator of the Shift framework and author of Shift, hello, y'all, a 5-point framework for organization culture transformation, she helps executives navigate culture transformation and build inclusive, purpose-driven organizations. A former vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion, Dr. Nicole has led initiatives in healthcare, higher education, and professional services, to name a few, because she's done more than that. She holds a doctorate in organizational change and leadership from USC, and her mission is to help clients and individuals and organizations, I should say, when we say clients, live, lead, and perform at their highest level. So please help me welcome Dr. Nicole. Hey, girl.
Hey, girl. Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Excited to have this conversation with you. So let me just out myself. Nicole is my girlfriend. I've known her so long that I'm not going to say because then it ages both of us.
Right.
So we're going to call each other Nicole. We're going to let the doctors go, right? But I had to give her props because let me tell you, this woman has been studying transformational change. So tell us a little bit about why, how you got into this and what, whether you want to talk about the Shift framework. Well, let me do this first before you do that. Let me read a little piece from her book, y'all. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Listen. And that's why I have my marker in here, because I want to make sure I read this because it's so good. In times of extreme division, that's where we are right now, y'all. Clarity and alignment are paramount. The Shift framework provides tools to set and navigate towards your personal and organizational North Star, transforming the challenges of polarization into opportunities for purposeful action. So good. Now, mind you, that ain't the first chapter. That's the intro, right? So tell us, how you even came up with the shift framework and really what it is.
Yeah, I will. But before I do that, I do want to address the verse that you read because it is so apropos. I'm so glad you chose that one. Culture change really has to start at an individual level. The organization can't change until the people within the organization change. And when
Mm.
the people change, that is reflected then in the larger organization. So that particular Bible verse that you read is so appropriate for this conversation. So thank you for choosing that one.
So
So
good.
you asked me where this kind of came from?
Yeah. Like
Okay.
I know, you've been doing this work and tell us your story. Like how did you come up with this shift framework?
Yeah. So, I've been in the work of, I'll say, people and culture for 25 years. And I've been leading leaders, I've been leading organizations. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is leaders really struggle with the idea of how to turn their espoused values, those things they say they believe in, those things that they have posted up on the walls, turn them into actual lived values, into the reality for the people within the organization.
Hmm.
And one of the things I found, particularly during 2020 and 2021, we were in COVID. We had the murder of George Floyd. So we had these two really seismic shifts in the way leaders led and the way organizations function. And I found that a lot of leaders were completely unmoored during that time because they didn't have a framework either internally or even
Mm.
externally as to how to be in that space. They didn't know how to lead in that space. They didn't know how to lead individuals, organizations within that space. And even though organizations had these diversity statements written and these values posted on their wall, they were just words. They did
Mm.
not know how to live into the words that they had written. So I really focused on helping leaders figure out, what do these words mean for you? The other interesting thing, though, that happened for me that made me really put this book in writing was I had a colleague ask me, as I was a chief diversity officer in higher ed, which was really significantly impacted by these two events, COVID and the murder of George Floyd. They asked me, how do you do this work? And, it was an interesting question because I could hear in their tone that it was a double-sided question. One part of the question was, how do you stay emotionally connected during this work? Because it's
Mm.
so very taxing. But then the other part of the question was, how do you do this work successfully? And so I really kind of sat with that question. And I took some time out to really think about those two aspects. How am I still okay, right? How am I still emotionally well in this
Mhm.
space? But how am I also so effective? One of the things I've believed in my entire life is intentional reflection, taking time to pause and intentionally reflect. So that's what I did. I thought about that question. I thought about, what is my approach to this work? And I took the time to actually analyze and map out and document the methodology that I had been using for decades, both in my personal life and in my professional life, and particularly in this work of DEI. So the shift framework is an outgrowth of that intentional reflection and really analyzing, mapping, and documenting the approach that I have been using for so many years.
So good, so good. I love that you said that one of the questions is, and by the way, if you guys see me looking down, it's because I'm writing, because I'm taking notes too, because I'm learning too. Okay. So and you see my pen is in my hand. So those of you that are on YouTube, by the way. So listen, you said, how am I emotionally well? I think so many people in corporations, especially leaders,
Yeah.
we've had these conversations where people forget that they're people
Yes.
first, and
Hmm.
they look past how they're feeling or what's coming up for them.
Yeah.
And so, talk to us about the impact individually, which then leads into the culture when a person really connects emotionally to themselves.
Wow, that is a really deep question. So, whew, one of the things I think happens when people really emotionally connect with themselves and they think about what drives them, they think about what motivates them, they think about what triggers them, they're able to come into that workspace much more aware, much more intentional about the way in which they live in that space, the way
Mm.
in which they interact and engage in that space because they're coming in with awareness. So often we work kind of on autopilot, and we just maintain habits that we've always had. We do the things we've always done. We don't ask ourselves the why behind the things that we're doing. We don't ask our organizations the why. And the why is so critically important because without the why, it just becomes activity. But if you are clear on your why, then when you walk into that space, you can walk into that space with purpose. And you can walk into that space with intentionality and with clarity. And I'm going to dare say with courage. But if you don't have that why, your personal why and the organizational why, then you're just reactive. You're just kind of doing things, but you're not being intentional about what you're doing. You're not being aware about what you're doing.
So good.
So
And
that's the connection.
And what's interesting, you said with courage, it made me think of, okay, so I'm about to out myself, y'all, because I was not always the best supervisor. Okay. So when I was working a 9 to 5, I remember having a woman. So I, at the time, was a deputy director of training for an organization, and we trained over 300 organizations in LA County. Okay. Just to give you perspective. So I had a lot of trainers under me. And this one woman every week for supervision would come in crying. Now, those of you that know me like I think you do, listen, the first time you cry, I got you. The second time I'm done. Didn't we talk about this already? Why are you crying again? Right? That I just have very little patience. Right? But I realized that's who I am. I needed to meet her where she was. Here's this difference conversation, y'all. And so every week I would just give her the Kleenex and go, tell me when you're done. Like I had her the Kleenex box. Here, tell me when you're done. Or come back when you finish crying. Right. But this one week I said, so let's talk about what's coming up for you. Now, mind you, I've been trained as a counselor. I just didn't want to do it.
Right.
I'm sharing that because I had to have the courage to have a conversation with her that I did not want to have. I also had to have the courage to come out of my square box that this is how everybody should be because I'm like this. Yeah, no, everybody's not like me, right? This is the difference conversation, you guys. And I'm going to tell you, it was like that day, not only did I help her find her strength, because we got to, I'm not going to tell her business on the live, but we got to pull through what was coming up for her. And it really had to do with her self-worth around the other team when she was my best trainer and she didn't know it.
Okay.
And so, empowering her because that's what was coming up for her. I realized that was happening for her with her partner at home too.
Yeah.
And I'm sharing that with you because wherever you go, there you are.
There you are. Yes.
And so once we got clear on that, she not only was so doggone good, she ended up getting a job offer someplace else.
Which is a great thing. I know that wasn't your intention, but that's how much you empowered her.
Because then I liked her after that, because then I understood, right? But I'm going to tell you, I fought and fought and fought. And it was like years before I said, okay, Nicole, you got to do something different because this isn't working. Just telling her to finish crying is not working. And she comes crying every week, which now on this side, I realized she was comfortable enough to come to cry to me. And I wasn't giving her that space. And so I'm bringing that up here because I feel like we're in such a transitional state in the world right now when we talk about organizational culture. And this is not just about DEI, y'all. Some companies are getting bought out and merging. Some companies are, you're getting laid off. You're going to a whole nother company. You have a whole nother culture you have to get to know. So I think it's that cultural shift that is so important.
Right now, we're engaged in, I'd say, a tug of war within our society around the kind of organizations we actually want to have. So you have one group of folks who's really trying to take us back to this idea of industrial manufacturing, where the people who work in the organizations are like cogs in the machine. We're trying to take away worker protections. We're trying to take away worker rights. And then you have this other person, this other player on the other side of that tug of war that is really moving us into and has been moving us into what I call human-centered organizations, where leaders recognize the humanity of the people within the organizations. We really saw this pick up during COVID when we had to move very quickly to remote work. And so you still have organizations that are recognizing that even though COVID's not here anymore, the idea of allowing people to work remotely, giving them that flexibility and that space helps people better balance their lives, right? They can better integrate their lives and their work in a way that is meaningful for them. And actually in a way that makes them even better, more productive employees. But this tug of war is happening between which kind of organization are we going to be? And DEI is just one of the elements of that overall tug of war.
Oh, that's so good. So good. So can you tell us more about some of the other places you see we're in a fight for in organizational culture right now?
Yeah, so DEI we know is absolutely one of them. And one of the things I think is really important to say about DEI and organizational culture is that DEI really should not be, it never should have been a standalone program or initiative or something that's talked about separate and apart from your overall organizational culture. Because ultimately, creating equity and inclusion is something that has to be built into the fabric of the culture overall. Do we have psychological safety within our organization? That's part of inclusion. Do
Mhm.
we allow for wheelchairs? Like all the different ways in which we think about DEI are ultimately part of organizational culture. So some of the other places where I see this coming up is in the role of leaders. One of the things that I found, and I had seen it, but I hadn't really talked to people about it until I started working on my dissertation. And that was that leaders have really made this shift from being being intentional and being strategic to becoming very tactical. So
Hmm.
the conversations about why we exist, how we exist, leaders aren't having those kinds of conversations anymore because they're so focused on checking boxes to say, where's our revenue right now? We need to do this next. We need to do this next. So they become very tactical, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, we used to call them working managers. Well, our executives are working executives, meaning they are doing the day-to-day work of the organization, and they're not taking the time to sit as a leadership group, as that executive leadership team to say, who are we as an organization? Why do we do this work? How do we want to treat our employees? What do we want this place to look like and feel like? They're
Mm.
not having those conversations. And that is really a detriment to creating intentional organizational culture and creating a place where employees really do feel as though they can thrive. So
Right.
that's the other part of the culture that I'm seeing
And
significant.
even that's a part of employee engagement. When an
Absolutely.
employee feels seen and heard and valued, they're going
Absolutely.
to outperform. So
They're
your
going to
numbers
have
are going to skyrocket. You know, you're going to make all the productivity that you probably didn't even realize. Like if I go back to the example of the woman I used that I didn't want to that I didn't want to actually coach because it was this is before I was a coach, by the way, y'all.
okay.
So
You were a coach, you just didn't know it.
I just didn't know it yet, right?
Yes.
So you're right. So listen, when I really began to help her through what was coming up for her, she became a whole new person and
Yeah.
her numbers, I mean, people were like, "What did you do to her?" I was like, "I just talked to her," right? So it really does make a difference. So let's talk a little bit about measuring success
Okay.
because now that we are seeing this shift as an organizational culture expert, what would you suggest be the new way that leaders and even individuals measure success for themselves in their work?
Oh, wow. Those are two different questions. So let me start with measuring from an organizational standpoint. Okay. One of the things that's really important when you think about DEI and culture overall is that just like every other aspect of an organization, we need to be able to measure it so that we can see kind of where it started and where we are now, so that we can determine what strategies are working and what strategies aren't working. And I'll be quite frank, one of the I think challenges in DEI work for years was that people didn't understand, nor did they actually measure what DEI was about.
Mm,
So they weren't able to come to the table like other divisions, right? Other departments and say, here are our metrics. So without that, it was hard to continue to justify some of the work. So I will say this about measurement. One of the things that organizations have to do is determine from the very beginning, before they begin doing the work, whatever that work may be for them, they need to determine what does success look like?
mm,
How do we measure that? And there are going to be lots of different ways to measure it based on how you define success. But you can't define success or lack thereof after you've already started the work.
right.
Right? With anything, you have to say, what is it I'm trying to achieve? What does success look like? And how do I measure it? And you design those measurements up front. You should also do an initial benchmark measurement. So for instance, maybe it's your employee engagement survey and you look at different areas and say, these areas are low, we need to bring these areas up. Maybe it's your retention.
Mm,
Maybe it is people's access to training and development. So what is it that we're trying to impact? What does success look like and how do we measure that? Let's get a baseline measure. And then we come back and we continually remeasure that to see if we're making progress. If we're making progress, that means our strategies are appropriate. If we're not making progress, then we need to go back and revisit not the measure of success, but we need to revisit the strategies that we're applying to hit that measure of success. Does that make sense?
That's so good. Ooh, that's so good.
But what happens oftentimes is people will say, oh, well, that just didn't work. Well, no, it's not that it didn't work. It's that you didn't know how you were going to define how it worked. And when it wasn't doing what you thought it should do, you scrapped it, as opposed to looking at the strategies and the tactics that you put in place to achieve that outcome. So the outcome, the desired outcome isn't the problem. It's the way in which you're trying to measure it or not measure it. So that's the first part from an organizational standpoint.
Right. Well, before you go into the second part, when you were talking, she's giving great relationship advice too, y'all. Listen. So because, and I'm saying that because that's what was popping up in my mind, because at the end of the day, a relationship, as in a romantic relationship or a friendship, is the same thing as a business relationship. It's a relay between two people. And if you're in a relay race and I'm handing you the baton, it's all in what does success look like? Right. So if I know so let me just give a concrete example. So I have a girlfriend that's married and she hates cooking and her husband loves to cook, and she felt some kind of way that she doesn't cook. I said, girl, first of all, I love you, but not only do you hate it, but you can't cook. Right. So let go of what the world says. Success for you guys is that he cooks, because baby, y'all might not live if you had to cook, right? So it's really looking at that piece, which really makes a difference when you measure who you are, who you be, what you do based on someone else's metrics that may not be a good fit for you. It will set you up to fail every time.
Which, and that's an excellent point, because it really does bring me into the next part of your question, which is from an individual standpoint, how do people measure their own success? I wish someone had told me years ago, and I'll say decades ago, actually, because it's been a while, you get to define your own success. And you just said it, right? You get to define your own measure of success. So when you go into an organization, first of all, you should always be assessing that organization to determine if that's where you want to go. People go into job interviews hoping that the company will pick them. No. Question is, are you going to pick them?
That's so good.
So you need to look at that organization and determine if this is a place you want to be. You need to ask questions before you accept any position. And you can even continue to ask the questions after you're there. This is what I need in my professional life. This is what I need in my personal life. This is how I need to balance these things. How is this organization going to allow me to achieve that, right? Or help me achieve that? So that's the first part of your success. Define your own measure of success and be clear about what it is, right? And in truth, I'll be real honest, Nicole, you and I have had this conversation before about me starting my own business, right? You're like, no, it needs to be narrow. Be real specific. What is it that you're looking for? Because when you go broad like this, it's really hard to reach that success, because one, you haven't really defined it. And two, it's just too much happening. So when you go into an organization, you need to know what success looks like for you. And then on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, you need to be asking yourself, is this meeting my standard of success? Right? You can't just walk in and forget about it. One of the things that I did for years working for organizations was go in and put my head down and just do the work. And I think it is very typical for a lot of women, and I'll go so far as to say a lot of, I'm going to say Black women. Right? We go in, we put our head down, we do the work thinking that's going to tell the story for us. One, it doesn't tell the story for you. But two, it's very easy to get lost in your work, just like you sometimes get lost in your marriages or other relationships, right? You have to continually stay focused on what it is you're trying to achieve, who it is you are trying to be, and ask yourself if the things that you are engaged in, the things that you are surrounded by, are helping you achieve that. And if they're not, you need to find somewhere else to be. Right? I stopped writing. I stopped speaking. I stopped doing all the things that for me are really powerful and meaningful and impactful, because I was at work and I just put my head down and I just did the work. Yeah, stay focused on who you're trying to be and what you're
right. And don't get focused on the shoulds. I remember having a conversation. I don't remember if it was on a podcast. I don't remember where this was. So I didn't come up with this, but I'm going to say it, that sometimes we should on ourselves. Like we
Oh,
say the
absolutely.
things we
All the time.
should do, right?
We
And that
should
happens
do.
in relationships too, y'all. Look, I don't know why this relationship thing is coming up with you today, but even we get married and then we try to change who we are to be in this relationship. And that happens in jobs too.
It
And when you
does.
shift who you are, you either resent it, you hate
Mhm.
it, you're unfulfilled, unhappy, you're bored, something is off. It's because you're not being authentically who you are.
Exactly. Exactly.
So good.
In complete
So
agreement.
so as we wrap, I want to talk a little bit, and I know we probably talked all around your book, but I want to talk a little bit more. And by the way, we'll put a link to the show notes for this book. Tell us
Thank you.
more about the book,
Yeah.
who needs it, and what they will get as they go through. Now, Nicole is much like me. This is not a read. This is a do. Meaning you could be doing the work chapter by chapter, right? So tell
Yes.
them a little bit about the shift framework and what they get when they buy the book.
Yeah, happy to. So the shift framework is actually a 5-part framework, and shift is an acronym. So each of the letters represents one of the steps. So the first step is set your North Star.
Hmm.
Organizations have a responsibility to set their organizational North Star, why they do the work they do, how they do the work that they do. So set that organizational North Star first. The second letter, H, is for here. You are here, almost like when you're at an amusement park and you're trying to find your place. There's a little star that says you are here. You have to determine where you are as an organization in relationship to your North Star. A
Hmm.
lot of companies will do organizational culture assessments, right? Or they'll do employee engagement assessments. But they haven't started by figuring out their North Star. And what happens when you assess before you know where you're trying to go, you get all this information that may not be relevant for you, that becomes overwhelming. You get stuck in analysis paralysis because you don't know what to do with all of that.
Yeah.
So the importance of setting your North Star first says, this is where I'm trying to go. Now, when I figure out where I am, my here, I'm looking in relationship to where it is I'm trying to go. I'm not looking at everything in the world. I'm looking to how do I get there? So now
good.
I have a clarity on where I want to be and where I am. The next letter is I, illustrate your path forward. Now we need to actually figure out how to close the gap between my North Star and my here. Very specific. What are the skills, the knowledge, the behaviors? A big part of this book is about aligning behaviors with the values that we say we espouse. Because we say them, but we don't know what they look like in reality. So a huge part of this book is saying you have to align the behaviors that you're expecting of your leaders, of your employees, how you make decisions, how you set priorities with what you say your values actually are.
Yeah.
So that's the I, illustrating the path forward. F is forge ahead. You don't start doing the work until you have figured out those first 3 things. How many organizations have you been in? I know I've been in countless where they just start doing stuff, right? They just jump in and they don't know what they're doing, why they're doing it. They just know, well, we got to do something. I call that reactive doing. It gets us nowhere, right? So in this framework, you don't begin doing the work until you have first figured out those 3 things, including figuring out how to bridge the gap.
Yeah.
And then the last one is T, take a look around. Anytime you take a journey, you have to stop and say, okay, where have I gotten to where I'm trying to go? Is it what I expected it to be? Do I need to regroup? Do I need to take on new trips, new goals? Do I need to make this one more expansive?
Yeah.
So that's your opportunity to really pause and reflect and figure out if you actually achieved what you wanted to achieve. So that's what the framework lays out for organizations. In terms of who it's for, it was gauged and written for executive leadership. However, it's for anyone who has any sphere of influence. If you only have one person with whom you that reports to you, if you only have one other person that you work with, if you have a team, if you have a department or division, no matter how small or how big, your sphere of influence, you can apply this particular framework because it allows you to decide within that sphere of influence why and how we want to be and how we get there.
And what's so good I love that you said, even if you have a small team, because eventually the goal of a small team is to do what? Grow. So if you start on a strong foundation with the shift framework, then as you grow, you will have the methodology and know how to grow in the right way. So
Exactly.
thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for sharing your framework. And listen, y'all, those of you that are in organizations or you know you want to be a leader, you need to get
Exactly.
this book. Again, look in the show notes, grab your copy. And with that, I appreciate you. Everything you said was so good. I got a page of notes. And listen, if it's not meeting your standard of success, it's time to do something different. It's time to make a what? Shift. No pun
Make a
intended.
shift. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank
Thank you, girl.
you for that. Thank you.
So that's it for this episode. Want to thank Nicole again. Such great gems. You guys, listen, I know you got value. So please make sure you're posting in listen, if you're here in YouTube, you can post comments here. You can post comments no matter where you're listening, or you can send us an email. You can send us an email at info@NicoleRobertsJones.com. If you have questions, thoughts, comments, love to hear your insight as you watch these episodes. And then, I'm always going to ask you to share. And I ask you to share, not because I'm trying to grow my following. Well, yeah, I am kind of trying to do that too, but that's not why I'm asking you. I'm asking you because somebody in your tribe, your family, your network in social media needs the insight that Dr. Nicole just shared. So share it. All right. And with that said, I will see you for our next episode. Thank you for joining us.